Okay, welcome everyone to the Milbank Tweed Forum. I'm here with close friends who happen to be general counsels. It's a small world in the nonprofit general counsel world.
Aren't you supposed to say distinguished panel?
Distinguished panel.
Thank you.
Distinguished panel of friends who happen to be general counsels of some of the most important organizations in the country. So the first is Bonnie Brier, who very recently retired earlier this year as Senior Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary of NYU. Before her 5 years at NYU, she spent about 20 years as General Counsel of the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and the Children's Hospital Foundation. Sharon Cot is the senior, I should say that before joining the world of general counsels, Bonnie was a partner at a large law firm in Philadelphia, which I'm sure she'll tell you about, Ballard Spahr. Sharon Cot is the Senior Vice President, Secretary, and General Counsel of the Metropolitan Museum. And before joining the Metropolitan Museum in 1988, she was an associate at Patterson Belknap. Adair Ionid is a 2010 graduate of NYU Law School, and she's probably in the Guinness Book of World Records, having risen to the senior position at the Vera Institute for Justice, and she'll tell us how she got there. It's a short story. She did not work at a law firm. She didn't have time. Okay. On my left is Ken Montero, who is the Vice President, Secretary, and General Counsel of the Ford Foundation. And prior to joining the Ford Foundation, he also was at a law firm. He was at Debevoise and Plimpton. Jonathan Ng is the Global Director and the first ever in-house legal counsel for Ashoka, Innovators for the Public, and he'll tell us a little bit about that organization. And before joining Ashoka, he was at White & Case. And Gail Scoville, who is the General Counsel of the Open Society Foundations. Before that, she was general counsel, or I guess counsel to the president of Hunter College, and before that, she was general counsel of the Guggenheim. And before that, she was at Cleary Gottlieb Steen in Hamilton. So we're going to go through the panelists and ask them several questions. And the first question is, how did you get to be general counsel of a major nonprofit organization? And we'll start with Bonnie.
Thanks, Jill. I just want to say how lucky you all are to have Jill as a resource and a professor here. And if you have questions about jobs or career paths, nobody is more helpful than she is. So I've had a great journey. You can see it now from beginning to end as a lawyer. I came from a poor single-parent family in Florida, raised in Florida, raised in absolute segregation. There were no people of color in my schools till I was a senior in high school. Wasn't so hot for women either. I worked every day after school and all day Saturday in a jewelry store for minimum wage, which was first $1.30 an hour and then went up to $1.60. And if you worked as a children's counselor at the motels, as I did sometimes, it was exempt from minimum wage law, and I got $1.10 an hour. Maybe the tips got me up to minimum wage. So just to tell you one fast story about this, because it's so shocking. When I was in college, the best summer job you could have in Florida was working for the U.S. Postal Service because they paid a national wage, but they didn't hire women because they didn't have to. So there you go. We've come a long way. I went to a terrible high school. When I got to college, my idea of 3,700 kids in 3 grades, my idea of an intellectual research paper was the Encyclopedia Britannica instead of the World Book. And I got to Cornell on virtually a full scholarship. Had to work really, really, really hard, was at least bright enough to know that I was way behind the other kids in education. And then I kept doing better and better and better, fortunately, and then went to Stanford for law school, half scholarship, half loan. So I'm very grateful for all that. If you had asked me in high school whether I thought I could be a lawyer, I would have laughed. I mean, it never, ever occurred to me that I would have that kind of opportunity. So I feel very lucky. And I've also been lucky to have a very broad array of experiences, and I encourage all of you to stay open to, you just don't know where you're going to end up. The only lawyer I ever knew, I never knew a lawyer ever before I was a lawyer. And My idea of a lawyer was Perry Mason. I mean, I only knew that there were litigators. I really didn't even know what the other kinds of law were. But I had a lot of wonderful experiences. During law school, I worked at California Rural Legal Assistance, and I spent my first semester of my third year of law school at the Center for Law and Social Policy, which was a really preeminent public interest law firm in Washington. And I spent my first summer working for the Public Defender's Office in Miami, which is what I thought I wanted to be. And I spent my second summer, I split it between what was then a large Miami law firm, probably had 40, 45 lawyers, and Sullivan & Cromwell. And then I clerked in the Federal District Court after law school, and then I became an assistant U.S. attorney, a criminal prosecutor in Philadelphia. And then there were 3 U.S. attorneys in my year and a half. There was a very political time, change of president and all that. And so I went to a law firm in tax. That was a backlash. And while I'm at the law firm, and this is just an amazingly interesting, I think, story about how you end up taking a turn you don't expect. So now I'm a tax lawyer, and they sent out a memo in the firm. I've been there about 4 months. They're looking for someone to take over the pro bono representation of a firm client, and called Women's Way, and I volunteered. And as a result, I learned about the law of charity to do a good job for my pro bono client. I actually stayed there pro bono counsel for 20 years. And I became the firm nonprofit expert. It was a time when there wasn't a lot of money in nonprofit law. You would have some lawyer in a law firm who would sit on the board of the charity and provide a little bit of legal services. Charitable immunity was still partially there. It was dying, but there was a history of charitable immunity that had caused people not to have as many lawyers. And there I was, and I became a partner in that law firm, and then the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia was going to hire its first general counsel. Well, I should say that I did get lucky, because even though I started out as pro bono lawyer, I was right at the right place at the right time. Hospitals started restructuring and doing joint ventures and interesting things that was very tax-oriented. And there I was, the only person in the firm who was really the expert. And the universities then started doing things. And then I got lucky, and I became the first general counsel for the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And I spent almost 20 years there. And then I was very lucky, and I got to come to NYU and be general counsel here. And now I'm really lucky, because I just retired, and I'm having a wonderful time. I have 3 grown children and 1 grandchild, which is one of my motivators. She lives in Colorado. A husband of 39 years. I love retirement. It's been a great journey for me, but I'm a very lucky person.
Thank you, Bonnie. Sharon? Fascinating. I've known Bonnie a while, but I learned a lot there. Thank you. Thank you. So, my path. Let's start in college. Maybe I grew up in Virginia, went to the University of Virginia, and pursued my passions. And I'm going to just lead with that and go ahead and give away what I think one of the secrets is in this field is that just pursuing, it's so important as a lawyer and a human being to pursue what you love and what you're good at, even as when Bonnie said you don't quite know where it's going to lead or how you're going to get there. So, for me in college, it was history. I loved American history, and being in Charlottesville, that was very inspiring, and I liked writing. But I really also liked math, and it was probably more my natural talent or gift. And so I started taking accounting classes as well, and I ended up double majoring in history and accounting, very logical. But I liked them both, so I did them both. So I wrote my college thesis on George Washington's account books. There's always a way. There is always a way to combine your interests. So then I thought about being an accountant right after college. I interviewed with all the accounting firms at that time, but I also felt ready to just continue with school, and I applied to law school and business school. And got in several combinations there and ended up at Yale. When I was doing my applications for school, what I realized was all of my summer jobs through the end of high school and through college had all been for either nonprofit organizations or government organizations. And just one of my personal reflections was I found it very motivating, inspiring to work for an organization that I cared a lot about and to have a career in public service. So as I applied to schools, I stated that as a goal, and I just sort of found it through the process. So for me, Yale had the most appeal, and it's where I went because I knew they cared about nonprofit organizations. It was a time where in the field, as Bonnie said, sometimes the nonprofit is at the bottom of the barrel or not as valued. And I felt it was valued at Yale, both in the business school and in the law school. So I enrolled in joint degree. I ended up not doing and finishing the business degree, which I regret, but that's okay. And then in the law school, pursued, there were 2 courses on nonprofits I could take. There was a tax course, there was a corporations course on nonprofits, and don't you know, I turned every possible paper topic in any class to have a nonprofit twist. I just found it interesting and fun. I wrote a law journal note on the fiduciary duties of the directors of nonprofit organizations. Everyone I knew at law school knew I cared about this topic, and some people tried to persuade me to broaden my horizons. It was a time to explore everything. I'm like, no, I want to do this. This is what I care about. And so I did. I just did it because I thought it would be a fun career. But summers are a good time to test out your hypothesis. So first summer, I wrote to nonprofits in New York. I wrote to the Ford Foundation. I was looking for places that had lawyers in-house. I wrote to NYU, I wrote to Columbia, I wrote to the Metropolitan Museum, I wrote to MoMA. I got a rejection letter from the Met. I got no response from everybody else. And so then I just got on the phone, and I got the general counsel of MoMA on the phone one day, Beverly Wolf, who I just talked her into it. She had never had a summer intern. She had no money. I said, that's okay. School has a fund. I can just come and help you out. And she said, okay, come. So I spent my first summer at MoMA, and it confirmed for me that blend of legal work and in-house work, and there was nothing better, frankly, than walking into that museum every day and then doing a project and maybe seeing where the results would play out. So I found that very satisfying and confirming. But I said to Beverly, I would love to do this for my career. And right after law school, she said, sorry, can't do it. No one will want you right after law school. She said, you know, you are useless to me. You don't know how to do anything. You're not trained. You know how to read a case. Thanks a lot, you know? So you need to go somewhere and I don't have time to train you. Our resources are tight. I don't have time. You need to go get trained to be a good lawyer and then approach a nonprofit and say, I'm here, I'm ready to serve. So that sent me to the law firm market, and I thought, well, some of the firms might have some nonprofit projects. At least I could be in a place where I could also learn that. And I just did my research on who had groups. Very few firms have identified groups, but a few do. And almost every firm has some nonprofit charitable work floating somewhere in the firm. So I did not approach the field as an art historian. Several people who work in museums do have masters or PhDs in art history. I approached it more as the field, and the niche I found from my own interests was tax. And so I ended up taking 9 tax classes or something crazy and working for a tax professor on a book and sort of pursuing. I thought, well, that's the vocabulary of all nonprofits need to be tax exempt, so that will be a useful base for me. I ended up second summer at Schulte, Roth & Zabel, which was a great place to be, and I enjoyed it. When I graduated, I ended up at Patterson Belknap. They do have one of those identified nonprofit tax groups. At that point, they wouldn't let anyone practice in that field full-time. So I could do half my time in that group, and I spent the other half in corporate and trust and estates, along with the tax exempt. I would go in thinking on my projects, I'm paying my dues to do this corporate project. We did some debt offerings, we did some restructurings, we did some mergers, and I thought, I'll pay back my law school loans, I'll try and be ready for a career, never quite ramped up my living expenses to a for-profit level, kept them at the nonprofit level, got rid of the law school debt, and When the Met was expanding their staff from 2 lawyers to 3, they called the general counsel at MoMA and said, "We're looking for someone, do you know anyone?" And that person who had mentored me that summer called me and said, "Go apply." So I applied and joined that team as the junior person of 3. And maybe in the next question, I'll tell you my reaction to the work, right? We'll save that. So.
Adair?
Yeah.
Right?
And then I just stuck around, and people left, and then I got promoted.
Yes, as Jill indicated, very little about my path is replicable. I was very lucky in a lot of ways, but backing up a bit, law wasn't my first career. I first worked in publishing, scholarly publishing, for 6.5 years. And, after that had sufficiently broken my spirit, I decided that I was going to go to law school. And my reasons weren't like, oh, I need to make more money. Publishing gets you well used to not making money. I wanted to feel more useful. And I think, that's something you'll hear from everyone on this panel. There's nothing in your work life that's more important than feeling that your contribution matters and that showing up, you are doing something for the organization where you work. So that was one of my major goals in going to law school, and the 2 areas in law school that I cared the most about were nonprofit law and criminal justice. And so my 1L summer, I was looking to see where those 2 streams cross. And similar to what Sharon was saying, I talked a woman named Beverly into taking, yes, different Beverly altogether, but clearly the name Beverly is the fact you should be latching onto. Look for Beverlys wherever you are applying. She was then the Associate General Counsel at the Vera Institute, and I talked her into taking me on as an intern my 1L summer. And in doing the work at Vera that summer, I learned I really liked it. I really liked the problem-solving nature of working in a general counsel's office. I liked being the person who handled very practical problems of a very idealistic organization. And I liked being able to make that sort of contribution and that use of my talents, because I am, by nature, very practical, even though we all have our ideals. And, so I decided that this would be the most amazing place in the world to work if ever I could. And I thought maybe at some point years later that would be a possibility for me. And my 2L summer, I worked at the Brooklyn DA's office to buttress my criminal justice background, same as I took clinics in that area. And I also took Jill's class. I took employment law. I took other courses that would prepare me for in-house work. And I applied for the Rockefeller Brothers Fund Fellowship in Nonprofit Law, thinking that this would be something that I could do for a year, then do criminal justice work, and maybe somehow putting one foot in front of the other, be able to work my way back to something that was that was like what I had at Vera that summer and like what I saw the people there doing. Little did I know, I did wind up getting that fellowship, and in the course of my fellowship year.
And that's at Vera.
Yes, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund Fellowship is a year-long fellowship in nonprofit law at the Vera Institute, working with the attorneys in the General Counsel's office. And in the course of my year there, I got to work on so many different things for emerging projects, for existing projects. And one of the things I really loved about it is that, working on a contract, you have to know the work. You have to understand what the people in the program are trying to accomplish. You have to work within their constraints, and you wind up learning a lot about areas that you didn't know before. Like, I've learned things about the use of solitary confinement that I never knew before. And I learned things about the practicalities of the justice system that law school never teaches you. But all in the course of, managing grants, contracts, and, helping facilitate the work. Partway through my fellowship year, I was promoted to Assistant General Counsel, and I got to keep doing this work I enjoyed so much. And then a year ago, I was promoted to Associate General Counsel, and I took on more of a mentoring role with the others in the department and with others in the organization. And in March, I was promoted to Corporate Counsel. and now I'm sitting in front of all of you. So I can't tell you that there's, anything you can do as a recipe, but I can say the thing that I think served me well in my work was that I was always excited to be there and doing very unglamorous work because I knew the purpose it served and because I'm nerdy enough to enjoy it for its own sake. So I think you have to have that balance if this is the work you want to do.
Thanks, Adair. And I don't think that there's a recipe for going from a fellow to general counsel in 4.5 years, but it's a great story. Ken?
Yeah, I don't think there's a recipe for any of this. I attribute where I am from luck and stamina. After law school, similar to one of the prior speakers, I didn't know any lawyers when I went to law school. I actually only ended up in law school because my boyfriend at the time applied for law school the year before me, and I helped him with his applications, and I thought, well, he did it, so I guess I can do it. And I was an international relations major, and there wasn't a lot to do with that. So I went to law school, and I remember being in the library in my first year and finding these binders of all these law firms. This was before the internet. And they had these binders, and I opened it up, and they oh my God, there's 300 lawyers at a firm. I had no idea that they had law firms like that, or that, that they took junior lawyers. And so that was very exciting. And I was able to get a summer job in my second year at Debevoise in Plimpton, and then I accepted a full-time job. I liked the people at Debevoise a lot. I decided to specialize in real estate because I liked the people in the real estate department. There were 8 of them, and I could go into, I didn't want to be a litigator, and I could go into the corporate department, which had, 150 associates, or I could go to the real estate, which had 4, and I figured it'll be safer and, more collegial, and so not great decision making, but I ended up doing that for 8 years. And my first year, one of the first projects I worked on was a transaction for the Ford Foundation. They were one of our clients. And at the end of that transaction, the in-house lawyer took me to lunch. It was a very complicated, very long transaction, and she took me to lunch. And I said to her, I think what you do is really interesting, and it's a great place, and if a job ever becomes available, please let me know, because I'd be really interested. And 8 years later, she called me and said that she was leaving. That was the first job opening in 8 years. And she said, I'm sure you're too senior now. You don't want to, you're doing cutting edge legal work. And the phone was swinging, and I was running to the fax machine. We had fax machines then. And, faxing my resume to her because I was so excited. It was kind of hard to convince the general counsel at Ford that, that I could make the switch from being a real estate lawyer to being, an in-house nonprofit lawyer. But luckily, I was able to do that. So that's all the luck part. And then the stamina is I've been there for 20 years, and, I'm the last one standing, so I'm now the general counsel. And so, and it's a fantastic job, and I feel incredibly lucky to be there.
I find this a little ironic insofar as if when I was in law school, I probably wouldn't have been attracted to a nonprofit panel of any sort, and nonprofit law wasn't necessarily on my radar screen. But I think that maybe that's a testament to how our approach to law and our approach to the different sectors has changed. And these days, it's not a matter of nonprofit or for-profit per se, but it's about mission. And I think that's what a lot of us want to find in the work that we do, certainly in the social entrepreneurship movement. The fellows with whom we work at Ashoka, if you ask them, do you run a for-profit or a nonprofit? They say yes. Their focus is really on impact and mission, and then the law, their legal structure is the means to get there. In the context of a panel like this, I think it's interesting because it's not so much just traditional nonprofit anymore, particularly even though I work at a nonprofit organization. A lot of the issues we deal with are blurring the lines and kind of playing in between that space of for-profit and nonprofit. And I can get into some of those specifics later, but some of my background is essentially, I come from a family who is very service-oriented. My dad is actually in the Peace Corps right now. He's finishing his 7th consecutive year. I didn't think that was possible. I thought they kicked you out after 2 years. But he's in the Peace Corps right now. My older brother decided to go back to medical school, did kind of a career shift and wanting to kind of do the a service kind of career path. And then my wife is focused on, she became an OB/GYN because she wants to serve women in Africa, particularly around fistula surgeries and some interesting issues like that. And so basically I was kind of surrounded by a family and friends who are kind of really service oriented to begin with. When I was in college, I was focused on journalism. I thought that would be a great way to kind of make an impact, and still think so, because it's a way to kind of tell other people's stories, and it's a lens that you provide to shine a light on different issues. And so that's why that was appealing to me. That kind of parlayed into a focus on more broad policy reform, and so that's what led me to go to law school. And after law school, I went to work at White & Case here in New York and focused on project finance. And what I liked about project finance was that it was kind of a more tangible project that you could actually understand and see the results that you were working on, and I thought that was definitely a lot more appealing and satisfying. Plus, some of the projects we were working on had a direct impact on the lives of some of those communities, particularly if it was a renewable energy project or so forth. In my pro bono practice, the way I kind of viewed that was a little bit like a laboratory for experimenting, a little bit of like R&D, so to speak. It wasn't so much do pro bono because it's just you get credit for it. Certainly you do pro bono because it's the right thing to do, period. But then also in a law firm, it's an opportunity to really develop your career by getting early client exposure, by trying to take ownership over different matters, and it's just a different clientele. But it's really good skill building. And so what I did with that was really focus on social entrepreneurship. At the time, it was still a very new area, particularly in regards to the nexus of law and social entrepreneurship. It was very nascent. And I attended this conference through this group called Starting Block, and I realized I was the only attorney in that group. And I thought, well, wow, a lot of these individuals who are coming from traditional business backgrounds, commercial banks and so forth, but who are focused on large-scale social problems, it was really interesting. And they were trying to start their own organizations, their own nonprofits, social enterprises, their own companies even. And I would ask them, who is your legal counsel? And a lot of them just said they tried to do it on their own. And so I saw that there was a need there, and what I did was organize a one-day legal conference at my firm. Didn't know what I was doing, but it didn't matter because I recruited partners enough counsel to help put on the program. And so we kind of did a nuts and bolts how to start your own enterprise, and focused on contracts, legal entity formation, employment law 101, and intellectual property. And from there, that led to kind of a steady stream of social enterprise clients. And then that became kind of what I was known for in a sense, and also got a lot of good work working with nonprofits and helping to do the incorporation and subsequent Form 1023 filings. And one thing led to another through contacts of a contact, and kind of the theme here is that there is no straight path to kind of where we all ended up. Ashoka, which is a global NGO based in Washington, D.C., was looking to hire its very first in-house counsel. And Ashoka's been around since 1980. But kind of to Sharon's point, sometimes you can, I didn't have to convince them, thankfully, but, well, I guess in terms of interviewing, but there are opportunities out there where large nonprofits, large charities need in-house counsel, but they probably don't even realize it themselves because they just haven't allocated the resources to it. But these days, the issues are becoming far more complex to where they can't rely just purely on pro bono. So I think that we're going to see more of a trend to have in-house counsel at large public charities. And so Ashoka is a good example. They went 30 years relying solely on outside pro bono counsel, and then they realized we need our own in-house counsel. So that's where I came in. And now today, I think what's really exciting is when you look at the social entrepreneurship movement, which a lot of you are familiar with, of course, but essentially that narrative comes down into three parts. And it basically starts with the premise that the world's problems are growing increasingly complex and global in nature. Then the problem is that the current sectors of government, business, philanthropy, and even education are inadequate alone to address those problems. And so we need to find a way to kind of work together. Those sectors need to combine forces and address these problems together. And so the solution then essentially is where social entrepreneurship comes into play. And then we talk about what social enterprise is. And essentially, at least from our perspective, that's more of a focus on the organization trying to pursue a primary social good using business means. And so what does that exactly mean? And so when you talk about business means, well, first, it's organizational form agnostic, so you can be nonprofit or for-profit. But when we talk about business discipline, I guess, in the nonprofit context, we're seeing this happening all the time. These aren't traditional nonprofits that rely solely on grants and donations anymore. They're trying to pursue sustainable funding sources, diversify their earned income strategy. Then there's a focus on scale in terms of not necessarily their organization, but their impact. How else can we share our ideas, maybe through some open sourcing? And then lastly is kind of this focus on measurement and really trying to ensure that just like we can measure profit, financial profit, let's try to measure in a data-driven way social impact. And so I think we're seeing the evolution of how nonprofits are changing, and the law is catching up to that.
Yeah.
So I definitely hear some similarities and some differences. I don't think I have Ken's stamina, and I definitely don't have Sharon's focus. I might have some of Adair's luck, and I'm not sure about the others. I came out of law school probably thinking I wanted to go into the nonprofit sector, but there was no one in the placement office who had any interest in helping with a nonprofit job. I think the year I graduated from law school was the first year of the first Skadden Fellow, so that whole world of fellowships didn't really exist. And, 75 law firms from New York came to campus to interview, so I lined up like everybody else. But the truth is that I wasn't completely opposed to the law firm world. My father was had a great career as a law firm lawyer. My mom was a political activist, so I had these two streams sort of fighting with each other. So I went to Claire Gottlieb. I think I chose them because I don't have the focus and I didn't know what I wanted to do, and Claire didn't make you choose a department. But I quickly became a tax lawyer, and tax worked because the regs changed so often that you could become an expert really fast. And I figured charities cared about tax deductions, so there was probably some connection. And it seemed like a route that might lead me there. Unlike my predecessor at OSF, who I know resigned from the law firm world, he was with me at Cleary literally the day after he wrote the check for his last student loan. I was okay at a law firm. It was probably the single most intellectually challenging thing I've ever done. But it wasn't for me. It wasn't where my heart was. So after about 6 years, I started looking around, and at least I said I was looking around. And after I started looking at about 5 years, and I wasn't seeing anything. And after about a year and a half of looking, but not really showing any evidence of looking, my husband said to me, look, it's great if you want to leave, and it's great if you want to stay and admit you like this stuff, but you gotta stop saying you're going and not making any progress. So I kind of realized I was working too hard. I was at the office, every night until 10 or 11, and the only headhunter calls I was getting were from investment banks and other law firms. So I quit, and my husband quit, and we actually went to Costa Rica and sat on a mountain for what was started as an indefinite period of time, but turned out to be a year. And I didn't know how to find a job. So we had a great year in Costa Rica, and came back, and I actually wasn't sure whether I was looking for a law job or a nonprofit business job. But and I didn't really know how to tell, but I didn't have a job. So basically, I had lunch, coffee, drinks, and anything else I could think of with anybody who would talk to me. And one of the things that was amazing is how many people in the nonprofit world are willing to share their time. They don't have many jobs to offer you, but they're willing to give you their advice, they're willing to give you their perspective, and somehow one thing leads to another. So, I know what the other similarity is, Beverly. Although my Beverly was the same Beverly as Sharon's. And I had lunch with Beverly one day, and she said, so I think the Guggenheim was looking, actually, we spent an hour with her telling me all the things I would have to do and that there really weren't any jobs. But at the end of it, she said, well, actually, I think the Guggenheim was looking for somebody, and I think they wanted a tax lawyer, but they were hiring a while ago, but let me call my friend. So she called the general counsel of the Guggenheim, who said, we've seen all our candidates, we're making a decision this week, she's got to get her resume in. I got my resume in. 4 months later, I got a phone call from them. Actually, I went in, I interviewed, and I didn't hear from them again. And that was sort of a key point. At a certain point after that, at this point I was working part-time. The lovely people at Aiken Gump had decided that really I would love being a lawyer and I would really love being a tax lawyer. I just didn't know it. But if I came to work for them, my view would be totally different. And I kept saying, no, actually, I'm interviewing for jobs. I really want to be in the nonprofit sector. And they were great. They said, come work for us part-time. So I was working for them part-time. And finally, I called the general counsel of the Guggenheim and I said, look, I have 2 days a week free. You don't have to make a commitment to me. Why don't I just come in and help you with your work? So I had a big debate with Beverly as to whether I was going to charge them for that or whether that would keep them from hiring me. I did end up charging them. Beverly's view was they got to know you're a professional. Don't let them get into the habit of thinking of you as a volunteer. I worked for them for about 10 days, and they made me an offer. Let's see. Unlike Ken, I didn't have the patience to stick around. I went in as an associate general counsel, but my predecessor had just been made deputy director of the museum, and it was pretty clear at the interview stage that they were looking for someone who might grow into being general counsel. So no guarantees were made, but I knew there was this possibility, and a year later, I became general counsel. And that was a really great job. I just don't have the attention span to do one thing for 20 years. So I stayed at the Guggenheim about 9 years. I have to say that I, again, stayed about a year longer because I didn't know how to look for a job. I still hadn't learned how to look for a job. And my husband was really creative and said, well, it worked last time. Why don't we go to Costa Rica? So we did it again. And that time I actually technically took a leave of absence from the Guggenheim, but within about 3 months, it was clear to them that you can't really operate with an interim general counsel who's playing in the rainforest, and a general counsel playing in the rainforest. And it also became clear to me that the Guggenheim had been the job of my dreams, but it was time for something new. Came back, opened the New York Times. Pretty much the first week of my job search, I saw an ad for the Hunter College position. It took 3 to 4 months to get hired, but it was really kind of right out of the book. Stayed there for 7 years. And then I really had the experience you kind of hope for, which is somebody who I'd worked for many years said, if you got a call from Open Society, would you be interested in working for them? And I said, 7 years is about my focus time. I guess it's time for me to be moving. No, actually, I knew a lot about Open Society, and I knew it would be a fantastic job for me, so I immediately said yes. It again took them like 6 months to hire me. Like, they call me, and it still takes 6 months to get the job, but it worked out. I think that's about it.
Great, thank you. We'll start with Bonnie again. I just want to ask, all the general counsels, what is it that you do every day? In other words, what does it mean to be the general counsel of a nonprofit organization? And Bonnie, in your case, what did you do
What
every
did
day?
it mean, right? Well, NYU is a big legal office, and it's separate from the medical center office. So just at the university, NYU is the largest private university in the country. It has the problems and challenges of a city. And so when I left, there were 15 lawyers plus 2 searches going on, one for a second lawyer in Abu Dhabi and one for another corporate lawyer. And because it's so big, it can afford to be specialized, and that's what happened. It's not that everyone has to be ready to jump in. Bizarre things happen, you know. You can have an eagle on the ledge of the president's office, and it's got a broken leg, and people are concerned about it. I mean, weird things happen. But basically, people have a specialty so we can provide good services. So the specials, there were 2 real estate lawyers and 3 labor and employment lawyers, one of who did mostly global, and 2 lawyers who did most of their time in intellectual property, and then 2 lawyers who were corporate lawyers who did mostly global but did other corporate, and then 2 lawyers who did litigation and also student issues, which are very similar to litigation. We get a lot of student issues, particularly when their parents are lawyers. Please don't do that when your children are in college. It's really ugly. But a lawyer who was specialized in treasury-type issues, financings, a nonprofit expert that we got from Patterson Belknap, who was wonderful, and then the lawyer in Abu Dhabi. And I hired all but 3 of the lawyers. So so people did their specialty. The general counsel has 3 roles. One is to run an office of lawyers. The second, I was the secretary of the university, so I ran the office of the secretary. That's all the board stuff. Governance, I created charters, I rewrote our bylaws, charters for committees, rewrote the bylaws, dealt with the resolutions and minutes and that sort of thing. So that was the second job. And the third is that you're a part of the senior team and you are an advisor as part of the senior team. So 3 jobs, obviously very political. So I think that's pretty much what I did.
So, as this trained tax lawyer, I arrived at the Met, and they said, welcome, here's your docket. You're responsible for HR litigation, immigration, please get us some visas, copyright, and I don't know, something, insurance litigation, slip and falls. Like, okay, did you catch on my resume that all I know, pretty much, is like nonprofit tax law? So at that point, there were 3 lawyers, all had nonprofit tax backgrounds, trust and estates, which I think is sort of the old approach to exempt org work and in-house work, certainly at a charity that is the fortunate beneficiary of many, many bequests, estates, gifts, and you need that pipeline. But it was a time when the diversity and complexity was growing in-house. So I said, okay, and like, how do I learn this? And one of the lessons for me is I would take a bet from any of you. Every single class that you have taken in law school in some way has come up in-house in the practice at the Met. Every single topic. And as I sat at Patterson Belknap and was like, I want to do nonprofit tax, but I'm paying my dues and I'm doing tax debt offering. I was at the printer till 2 o'clock in the morning before one of my interviews at the Met and thought, don't have to do that anymore. Wrong. We did a tax-exempt debt offering within my first 6 months at the Met. I spent my first year at the Met grateful for every single assignment I had at the law firm, no matter what the topic. Grateful for the varied mentors I had at the firm, worked with a wide variety of people with different styles and expertise. I was calling them. I needed them. Our outside counsel trained me. I would go to courses. These issues were being handled by the other lawyers in the Met, and they trained me as best they could. But as the office grew and as I became more manager of the group, we hired a copyright specialist. We hired a labor and employment specialist. We're now a group of 6 full-time lawyers. 2 are the tax, trust, and estates background. 2 are transactional lawyers, one with the IP background and one with finance, investment, real estate, and construction docket, and 2 litigators. One of the litigators is full-time labor and employment. We're 2,400 employees. We're like a small university in a way. We have 120 PhDs in art history, and instead of having one art history department, we have 18. And so the Asian art department in a university context would feel like one department, and then the African art department another, and they are little kingdoms within the empire there, and they are client groups, and we sit as a little law firm, a little general practice law firm for this very active, ambitious group of professionals doing everything. We have scientists and we have the curators. The other litigator, one other person, does what is probably most visible to people outside the Met, and that is the cultural property cases, the World War II, the exhibitions, the art acquisitions. And so that's our team. And I do, similar to Bonnie, secretary of the board, oversight of the team, kind of second seating people on their projects and helping things along in the management issues, and participate as a member of senior management, which for me was that blend of business school and law school that I was looking for and interested in. It is, as Gail said too, very different in some ways from in-house practice, at law firm practice. The standard, I think, is as high for the work, and we certainly maintain that. The legal technical work we're doing is the same level, but we join a project earlier and we stay with it longer than you would if you're at a firm. A firm, you're in and out, the bills are running, and you do a focused piece of it. I'm in meetings where I'm not really asked to practice law, perhaps, for that meeting, but I'm issue spotting of something that's coming down the road, and it's a great opportunity to strategize on it and structure it. And then the legal work gets done, but I'm still on the team, and we're doing a press release or we're doing some other activity. And if you're in-house, especially at a nonprofit with stretched resources, you gotta want to and enjoy that part of it too. If you want to be in the ivory tower as a lawyer, in-house is not the place to be.
Sharon, could you just also tell us about 1 or 2 particular issues that you've worked with recently, and whether the gift shop or the vendors or the...
The vendors. You have vendors down here that take over Washington Square Park? What would I say? I think the cultural property issues, everything in the Met came from somewhere else, right? And one of the tough and interesting legal issues is when it came, what was the legal framework at the time, and how does that count now? And both the law has shifted on museums in this country, and the ethics and moral expectations have shifted. And the U.S. approach to foreign countries' patrimony statutes is very different from almost anywhere else in the world. And so we sit at a place where foreign countries and U.S. government officials have questions they want to ask about works in the building. And for me, it's been a privilege and a challenge to work with the art historians on those objects, and it's always a blend. Again, my theme, the law is key and it's a critical piece of it, but sometimes 80% of what we're doing is getting the facts straight and trying to figure out how exactly did this get here, when and under what conditions, and how do we feel about that today? And what's the law today? What was it then? And comparing the two. So we have returned to works last year to Cambodia. There was a lawsuit going on between Sotheby's and Cambodia for a related piece. We watched how that progressed in the courts, reviewed our files, and decided we wanted to be proactive and return those pieces. But we're in dialogue with foreign countries. We're in dialogue with families, victims of the Holocaust, Woman in Gold, movie out right now about a lawyer challenging not a museum, not a museum in the U.S., but foreign museum title to a work of art. Those are the issues we're navigating, and it certainly rests heavily on our shoulders to watch the precedent of what we're doing, because everything came from somewhere.
Well, I feel like they've covered a lot of it, actually. I mean, it's, the different hats. It's managing a legal office, it's doing overall risk management for the organization, and it's, guiding staff throughout. So, I mean, the analogy I use for it is staff have their projects, and their projects are their babies, and they love them unconditionally, and they raise them. And I'm every project's aunt. I'm around for the birth. I love it, but not uncritically. And I check in a few key points in the life course, and if, one of the other cousins is acting up, I can refer them to the other one and help them coordinate information that way. Which is sort of, I mean, it's, a tortured analogy, but that is a lot of the idea of having this as a central function. It's institutionalizing knowledge and experience so that a problem that arises once doesn't have to arise again, or can be more readily addressed if it does. So, I mean, and a lot of the way I do that is by training and developing trainings on the issues that come up again, over and over again. I mean, Vera, in addition to being a policy organization and a place that runs programs, is a government contractor. And that means we're subject to a lot of regulations that other people and other organizations are not. It means we have to be, especially in New York City, with all the levels of government we work in. We work with city, state, federal government, and we work across the country. And we sometimes work internationally. So this means we have to be aware of lobbying regulations to a degree that a lot of organizations our size would not. It means we have to think about New York City's procurement regulations, and it means that staff have to be able to do their work without being constantly frightened of hitting an electric fence somewhere. So a lot of what I do is try to train people to be thoughtful about issues but not scared of them. So lobbying is one. The grant compliance is another large one. We have foundation grants, we have federal grants, we have some private donations as well. Those are my favorite ones because they come, it's just a letter and it's so easy to review and comply with, and it's wonderful. But most money comes with strings, and I view my job as to facilitate the work by making those strings as visible and clear and unentangling as possible. We also, because we're a nonprofit and because we work with government, and because our institutional value is that we work with anyone, and we value working with government, and we want government to be its best. We do a lot of work with staff about, how to communicate and how to express a policy point of view without touching the third rail in any way. And I should say this, we are also a research organization. And so a lot of what I do is help guide the researchers in complying with the regulations that apply to their work. Some of this is data security, and we do an enormous amount of work documenting our data security for different levels of government, and the requirements for that are unholy. But it's also working with human subjects and making sure that when we're interviewing prisoners, we're doing that work ethically. When we're interviewing survivors of violence, we are not going in any way to cause them further harm. And so this is where the core issues you work with inform the practice of interpreting regulations or interpreting contracts. And I think it's part of what's most rewarding about the work. And I think you guys covered a lot of it, so I won't belabor it.
This one, I've got several.
So I, too, am the secretary of the board for the Ford Foundation, so there's a lot of board, I call it care and feeding of the trustees, and actually feeding because I have to, deal with the dinners. But there's, governance issues and a lot of making sure that the board is aware of what's happening at the foundation and what they need to know about, so that they're not blindsided about something that shows up in the New York Times. The foundation, so I'm the secretary, I also run a legal department, just as everyone has said, and part of the senior management team at Ford. I find that, so I've only been general counsel for 7 months now. I was deputy general counsel before that, and I find that the big difference between those two jobs is that my days now are in constant meetings, and it's a lot more sort of issue spotting, trying to determine how much risk there is and whether we have time to focus, whether we need to focus on that risk or not. If it's not a big risk, we probably don't have time and we're just going to move on and we're going to, do something else. We have 10 offices overseas. We make about 2,400 grants a year, about $500 million. So there's a lot of stuff coming through the Ford Foundation. We have 5 lawyers on staff. And so there is a lot of strategy and looking at risk, training people so that the staff you have, not just the legal staff, but all the staff sort of understand what the rules are, and that's your best way of reducing risk, is making sure that people are compliant. And I've also found that one of the best ways to make this foundation safe is to be accessible and helpful to the staff so that they don't think, oh my God, I have to hide this from the lawyers. They want to come to you because they know you're going to help them get to what they want to do the fastest and easiest way possible, and they sort of recognize that you're not there to throw impediments in their way. And if you do that, then people come to you and you reduce your risk greatly. So it's a lot of problem solving sort of all day long, and it's fantastic. I mean, it's different things. Every hour is something completely different, from an employment issue to, the lease of our office in Rio de Janeiro and, this grant that someone wants to do in Nigeria, and what is the Kenyan government doing to NGOs. And so it's really, I feel incredibly lucky that I have this great variety of work to do every day.
A lot of the in-house kind of legal matters have been discussed, so maybe I'll add something a little different so far as the culture is something that was important to kind of adapt to, especially coming from a large firm, then going in-house to a large nonprofit organization. And just the way, kind of the language that's used, the approach is very different. At our organization, it's kind of run like a family of sorts, and the kind of communication that goes on is very much like that with between family members of sorts, and so there are pros and cons to that. But as an attorney who pays attention to detail, it's you have to adapt your expectations a little bit, and then you also have to understand how to speak the language within that culture of your organization. How that manifests itself in a legal context is, I think, one of the common themes is that you're far more than just a lawyer. At a law firm, that's certainly your role, but in-house, you're a lawyer and business consultant, strategist, and so forth. And an example of that is overseeing our intellectual property portfolio and all of our different brands and trademarks throughout the world. Because I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, there are a lot of ideas thrown out there, and so everybody wants to trademark those new ideas and apply for federal registration. And I kind of tell them, let's see where this will go first, and then come back and let's talk 3 months later. And of course, 3 months later, they're on to their new idea. And so instead of trademarking 200 new ideas, I try to keep it focused on our house marks. And so there's some of that marketing and branding strategy that goes on beyond just kind of the application for the intellectual property. For grants, I don't work in a very litigious environment, and so the documentation needs to be, it's more of a conversation. It more captures and sets expectations. It's not necessarily drafted from a perspective that we might end up in court. Certainly you want the document to be very sound legally, of course, but the way you talk about it, the way you communicate it, the way you get it signed up, you're not kind of approaching it in a traditional commercial context. And there are other ways to kind of get to the goals that you want to occur, such as different milestone payments and reporting requirements and so forth. So that's a little different. Then we also have 30 country offices, and so working with them, particularly managing outside counsel and working with pro bono legal counsel all over the world, That's another key function. Externally, trying to work with our Ashoka fellows who are starting their new entities. I don't advise them directly, but sometimes we'll run workshops and provide resources for them. And one of the new areas, of course, are the new legal forms that have since emerged since around 2008. Some of them most of our fellows form traditional nonprofits. Some of them are looking into some of the new legal forms. And so that's something that I've been focusing on, and actually co-teach a course at Georgetown on social entrepreneurship and the law with a focus on those new legal forms. And then that kind of manifests itself into kind of how the practice of law is starting to change too a little bit. And so even Hogan Lovells global law firm is instituting a training program for their new junior attorneys that started in the UK. They're bringing it here to the United States, and it's called the BASE Initiative. It's Business and Social Enterprise. And so what they're training their attorneys to do is not only learn how to read balance sheets, but then also to apply an entrepreneurial mindset to what they're trying to do. And so go out there, start getting new business, or start learning how to get new business, but also seeing and talking with your clients about what shared value looks like. And shared value means essentially what's good for the broader community and what's good for the environment can and should also be good for your bottom line. Clients are starting to see that, and so the law is starting to catch up. And very few firms are kind of moving quickly to adapt to that, but we're starting to see how the practice of law is starting to change, even at large firms. And so I think that's very interesting. We're trying to play a role in helping to accelerate that. So there's some of that external ecosystem building for the space too.
So probably everything that I was going to say has probably been mentioned, so I'll just stress a few points. Sharon mentioned starting earlier and staying through to the end, and that's really what I love about being in-house. For me, that was going from black and white to color, doing sometimes the same work. And staying to the end also means seeing the consequences of the advice you gave. So if you went conservative because, I'm not really sure, but I'll just be a little conservative, you have to live with the fact that your client's not really doing the full mission that they wanted to do. And for me, seeing those consequences every day, having lunch with the client, and really understanding what they want to do and why they need to do it and why you need to get them as close as possible to what they want, that really enriches my practice tremendously. When I first started looking in the nonprofit world, one of the reasons I knew I had to leave was I was thinking back to my interviews with law firms, and I would ask people sort of why they liked what they did, and they would say, well, it was $1 billion deal. And I kind of thought, zeros don't matter. Like, it's the work you're doing, so who cares whether it's for $10,000 or for $1 billion? One thing that I've learned working for George Soros is that actually zeros can matter. And sometimes I'll do, like we just worked on a restructuring of some of our entities, basically to save 1%. And there's not much you do in the world where 1% matters. 1% for us means a lot more really great work that can be done because I used my tax skills well. And that's a really great feeling. Like everybody else, I'm completely a jack of all trades. Labor, a lot more labor than I ever expected to do. Like Sharon, I try to hire employment lawyers because I don't love the employment law stuff, but it's really integral to pretty much everything you do. I'm not secretary of the board because depending on how you count it, at a minimum we have 8 boards, and by some counts we have 54 boards. So mostly what I do is coordinate boards and make sure there is a secretary who's doing their job and that each board is doing what we want them to do. One of the most interesting things that I'm working on right now is that George Soros is 85. He's completely aware of his mortality and willing to talk about it and willing to plan for it. The organization grew up originally as an organization that wasn't supposed to live in perpetuity. It was supposed to spend down, actually in 2010, and in about 2008, I guess, he decided that he was making a difference in the world and that he really wanted to fully endow it. So this organization that for 20 years hadn't bothered to make any policies or have any governance or any structure is now turning to its general counsel's office to create governance. And that's incredibly fun. I mean, we're taking the organization from a place that existed day to day and turning it into something that, by existing day to day, it was all about everybody's relationship to George and the president. And we're turning it into something that will last forever, that goes beyond personal relationships, that makes sense, that's rational, but we're taking this just chaos of structures. If we have, well, first of all, the fact that I can't tell you how many boards we have is probably an indicator of the chaos. But I think we're in like 35 countries. Each country has its own structure and there's no pattern, and there's also no pattern in the entities' relationships. Like, do they expect advice from the legal department, or would they find the legal department's advice intrusive and unwelcome? So I came in and it's a stab in the dark on my first meeting with all these people. We need to sort of set up structures and expectations so that when George is gone, people will know how to relate to each other directly. So that's been a really fun, fascinating part of my first year at OSF. I think the Guggenheim hired me because they were having financial problems and they needed ways to make money. So they knew that nonprofits are supposed to rely on contributions, but contributions weren't doing it for them. They needed more, and they wanted to press the envelope and yet not be too commercial. So tax lawyer, knew the UBIT rules, and I was suddenly of value to them. And I guess the other thing, two more things. I have been amazed since I left Cleary to realize how much I learned at Cleary. The day I left Cleary, I thought I might be a good lawyer someday, but I certainly hadn't learned anything of note yet. But every day I look back to something I learned, or something comes across my desk and I think, wow, never seen that before. Oh, but wait, I could probably do it like this. And so that transactional training has proved incredibly valuable. The one other thing is that in each place I've been, the general counsel's office is responsible somehow for the very careful balance of representing integrity without becoming old maid librarian person to stay away from. And I take that integrity role incredibly seriously. And yet, like Ken said, they gotta want to come to you. So they have to see you as a problem solver. Your answer has to be yes, but. I mean, not always. If you say yes, but enough times, when you really need to say no, you have enough credibility and people understand that it's important. And I've also, so I've taken a lot of pride over the years in being able to represent that integrity for the institution, without sort of being a schoolmarm every day.
Thank you. We're going to start at this end, apparently, this time, so sorry, Gail. I have one more question, and I know that I'll mention that you're managers as well as lawyers, and that means you're responsible generally for hiring new lawyers. And some of you have done this recently. Gail has just hired someone and is about to hire another person. And I don't know about you, Jonathan, but Ken just hired someone. And Adair is about to hire someone. And Sharon hires people all the time. And Bonnie, I think, hired 10, almost the whole office, while she was, in the 5 years she was at the general counsel's office. So if you could hire someone today, who would you hire? Gail?
Well, I'm actually trying to figure that out, because as of about a week ago, I am posting a position. Historically, I have looked for people who have a specialty that I don't have. So traditionally, you look, I think most people, the most frequent ones are tax, IP, and employment, but who also profoundly want to be generalists, because no matter what your specialty is, you can't be a specialist in-house. So if there's someone who is all about the perfection of the art of the specialty, they're not going to do well in-house. What else do I look for? Increasingly, I'm feeling that transactional experience is just a huge help. And, humbleness, willingness to just roll up your sleeves and get the work done. Being in the in-house legal department is often not the sexiest part of the organization. We're less well-dressed. I worked at a museum. The curators were gorgeous. The fundraisers were bedecked, and then there were the lawyers. But people who really just care about the mission and want to get it done.
And how senior would that person be generally, and where would the person have received training?
So I think, as somebody said, in-house lawyers don't have time to train. So you got to have a number of years of experience. I know my former paralegal at the Guggenheim went to law school. She called me after about 6 months at a law firm and said, I'm not going to make it. I can't do this. And I said, I love you. I want to work with you in the future, but I can't do anything for you right now. And I told her 3 to 4 years. I ended up hiring her at 3.5 years. For myself, I think actually sticking it out 5 or 6 has really proven useful. But then again, I wasn't miserable in a firm, so I wouldn't stay 5 or 6 if you're miserable.
We don't usually hire, I'm a team of one, so we don't have other, but if I could, and based on some of the summer interns that I brought on to work with me, I think generally it's also definitely echo what Gail said, and it's about being able to adapt, being resourceful. So a lot of the intangibles that you can't just learn, skills you can learn, but that hustle, that resourcefulness, that sense of being extraordinarily good at what you do, but also just let your work do the talking. I think that's probably the best thing, and it'll shine through. Work product, excellent work product, regardless of who it comes from. I love when I read that and see that, and that's what I kind of want to strive for. Also, in terms of how to communicate, it's helpful. I always appreciate when, and I try to do this myself too, if I have a question, I've already thought it through and have something to offer. I have an answer, I have a solution that I'd like to propose. It may not be the right one, but at least I have something for you. And so I want to see your thinking. Show me your thinking. How did you arrive to that? Give me something to work with, and then we can analyze that and course correct or whatever. But just coming with a question is oftentimes not as helpful. And then I think the last thing would be, based on some of my prior interns, they again are just super curious, very interested. Nothing is below them to do, and so I didn't necessarily hire all law students. Last year, hired someone from Yale's MBA program, and he helped us build a finance model for an sustainability bond for affordable housing in India. And it was basically his idea to come up with a financing model, and we built it from scratch. But that kind of creativity and thoughtfulness was key. And so he also picked up on different legal concepts. You're not going to be an expert in these legal areas. You have to learn it somehow. And so the ability to be resourceful and detail-oriented, of course, but then also know when to follow your gut.
I just hired a deputy general counsel, and I've previously hired associate general counsels, junior to that. For the deputy general counsel, I wanted someone smarter than me, who knew the law better than I did, because I spent so much time, making decisions and, dealing with problems. It's amazing to have someone who can rattle off tax code sections and knows all about it, because she worked so deeply in it for 8 years. For my junior people, obviously I'm looking for smart people. I'm less concerned about sort of what their specialty was than that they had good training. I'm actually very lucky at Ford, because lots of people want to work there, so I get really great applicants when we have an opening. So, I'm looking for people who have been at a firm for, if it's a junior position, 3 or 4 years, they've been trained, they can do transactions, they understand that. And then really the primary thing is we're a small department, there's 5 lawyers. I want people that I want to see every day. So it's so important that, to hire somebody that I think and it's very weird. It's like speed dating and then you're married because, you get an hour and then you hire this person and they're there for a long time. So you sort of have to make really gut decisions. But so I think that to give you advice about, job interviews and things, really think about why you want to be at that place, what's interesting about that, what's interesting about you. People want to have a conversation with you. They want to, they don't want to test you on, what you did in contracts class. They're interested in sort of who is this person? Am I going to want to spend time with them? Are they interested in what I'm doing and what they're going to be doing? I think all that stuff's really important.
I'll echo a lot of what has already been said, and I'll say it matters what I'm hiring for. I will be hiring for a part-time counsel that's more senior. We also hire for fellows who are more junior and interns and the like. And I think, I want the quality, especially for someone more junior, I value someone who's had some work experience. Doesn't necessarily have to have been legal experience, but I think either some work experience or something that shows you learn the things that working someplace tells you. And I think this is what a lot of people pick up at firms, which is not just how to figure out the academic answer to a problem, but how to communicate it effectively, how to scale it to the people you're working with. Almost no problem in our office begins with the Constitution. So, someone who knows how to, really prioritize and scale. I think that's something that working teaches you. Some people are born with it, and if you can convince me of that, awesome. For someone more senior, I want someone who knows things I don't know. I want someone who can check my blind spots, someone who has experience I don't, and someone who can be a resource to me and to the organization. And also, we do tend to dress better than the rest of the Institute. So, a little style never hurt.
We had no turnover for 5 years, and then we had 3 positions open at once about 1.5 years ago. And reflecting on those selections, so all 3 had law firm experience. And why did I favor that? We are selecting and supervising the work of outside counsel at firms, so I think that is a helpful insight and skill to have. I think a candidate presenting some other skill that was also relevant or background would be perfectly fine, but that happens to be our particular pattern and experience. 2 of them came directly from firms, one a tax, trust, and estates lawyer, and the other the litigator joining the group on cultural property issues. And then the labor and employment lawyer, we hired law firm for 5 or 6 years, and then a different in-house experience in a corporate environment, and that in-house experience was appealing to me as well. Echo the criteria that others are using. The skills have to be there, the quality of being willing to be a generalist and learn anything, being very adaptable, being very humble, and being very committed. And on the committed, every single applicant, I think, tells me they really love the field and are committed to it. And I do look, we are blessed to have many, many applicants. I do look for some evidence of that, in addition to just saying it today, that is true for this person. And there's no formula to that. It doesn't have to be that their law firm experience demonstrates it, but something, their own personal experience. Tell me why, tell me how. I'd love to see that you acted on that and pursued it in some way before applying here, because it is very, very common in, I don't know if I'm speaking for everybody, in our institutions, that you see that commitment everywhere, in every department for every person. The guards at the Met, most of them anyway, the conservators, the curators, the publishers, the people in retail, everyone's made a choice to be there. Everyone's sacrificing salary options at other places to be there. Everyone's committed. So you don't fit in the legal department serving those clients unless you also have that commitment, and I'm always looking for that.
And I just want to ask a question. I assume, since it's the Metropolitan Museum of Art, when you post a job and you post in newspapers, how do you ascertain whether someone has that commitment when you have a stack of 5,000 or 6,000 resumes?
Usually the letter, if not the resume, the letter will, or email will explain, the candidate will explain why they want it. So I do need to see it on paper to make that first cut and to get you in the pool.
I think people have given great advice about the general qualities. I just wanted to add a few more. I'm not going to repeat the ones people have said. A good writer. It's really important that we look at writing samples that you can communicate both orally with to the right audience in the right way, but also as a writer. The ability to negotiate. There's huge negotiation both internally and externally. Integrity, which I'm sure everyone feels but just didn't get mentioned. And then, well, the way I always characterize it is a lawyer who understands both the big picture and the little picture. A lot of people are good at one, but they're not good at both. And when you're in-house, you really have to be concerned about both. When NYU's looking for somebody, at least when I was looking for somebody, we generally like 7+ years experience, although we did hire somebody who I'll talk about in a second. We look for a specific skill set because it is a big office. The ideal candidate has law firm and in-house experience. Mm-hmm. In-house at a university would be best, or a nonprofit. Obviously, we rarely get that. And I wanted to give you 2 tidbits of things people did. We hired a lawyer who was at Skadden. She really wanted to work in a university. She got Skadden they had some program to pay for a modest half salary, and then went to Long Island University and got them to pay the modest other half the salary and worked there for a year. And that was just a huge plus. I mean, that was a great sacrifice. The person we hired, who was only 4 years out, applied. We have a National Center of Philanthropy and the Law Fellow that's similar to the fellowship you heard about at Vera. And this woman, who was at a big firm and 4 years out, applied. I mean, it pays $50,000 a year. She probably made $200,000. And we had decided we wanted to hire a corporate associate. All the corporate lawyers really wanted somebody who could get trained in a variety of corporate areas. And so we hired her. So those were huge investments by those people, or at least one was willing to. Any candidate who comes in and does not know us, has not spent time on the website, is eliminated. I mean, you have to go in there and know who you're talking to. There are bios of all the lawyers. I mean, you need to really know the organization and the people you're talking to. And then I just want to say one more thing about being a general counsel as opposed to being in-house. I have known people who never wanted to be a general counsel. They really just want to be in-house. They want to be an associate general counsel or maybe even a deputy general counsel. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to be a general counsel, you have to have a lot of confidence and a lot of experience. In my first job, I was the only in-house lawyer. I was a corporate and nonprofit lawyer. My first big questions came from the operating room on consent. You don't have time to go say we're going to research it or even call anybody. You have to give an answer. I couldn't have done that when I was a younger lawyer. I wouldn't have had the confidence and just general judgment to be able to do that. So it's something that you need to think about as you go along. Fortunately, you don't have to make that decision for a long time. But the general counsel, the buck stops with them, the politics stop with them. If somebody's got to stay all night, it's going to be the general counsel. There are people who really prefer different lifestyle. And I just say that, you're all young and nobody has to make these decisions for a while. But that's okay too. You can want to work your way up to a general counsel, or you can want to just find a position in an organization you love where you're doing good work and be very happy with that.
May I just throw in one footnote that comes out of something Bonnie said? It's a great field to be in, and people are very committed. The hours are not necessarily less than the law firms. You should know that.
But the pay is.
Thank you very much to our distinguished panel. And I guess we're out of time. I guess perhaps you'll stay for a few minutes and meet some of the people if anyone's interested or has questions. Thank you, and thanks for coming.